This is A Rude Awakening. I'm Sabrina Jacobs. On today's show, delegates from the Nuestra America Convoy are back from their humanitarian excursion to Cuba. I speak to Olivia DiNucci of Code Pink and Brenda Lopez and Mark Friedman of the Los Angeles branch U.S. Hands Off Cuba Committee. But first, the news.
I'm Max Pringle with these headlines. Reuters is reporting that a U.S. fighter jet was shot down over Iran and that a search and rescue operation was underway for any survivors. That's according to a U.S. military official not authorized to speak publicly. It's the first such known incident since the U.S. and Israel launched its war with Iran on February 28th. The official, who spoke on condition of anonymity, did not provide further details. Doctors Without Borders said today that the Rapid Support Forces killed at least 10 people in drone attacks on a Sudanese hospital. The NGO said the paramilitary group launched 2 strikes on Al Jabalain Hospital, hitting an operating theater and maternity ward. 10 people died, including 7 medical staffers, and 19 were injured. The attack is part of ongoing drone warfare between the Army and the RSF. The World Health Organization reported over 200 attacks on healthcare since the war began in April 2023. The nearly 3-year conflict has killed more than 40,000 people, according to the UN, but the actual death toll is likely higher. The UN and human rights groups have accused the RSF and allied Arab militias of committing a series of ethnically motivated massacres in the war-torn country. Meanwhile, financial markets around the world rallied somewhat today on hopes that an agreement to open the Strait of Hormuz could be coming soon. Rebecca Bunden reports from Mumbai.
Strong gains were seen across bourses in Japan and South Korea, amid reports that Iran and Oman are drafting a protocol to monitor transit through the Strait of Hormuz, raising hopes that the crucial waterway could at least partially reopen. This comes after oil prices surged on Thursday, before many markets closed for Good Friday, with global benchmark Brent crude prices up 8% at over $109. Markets in Hong Kong, Singapore and Australia, as well as India, are closed for the holiday. Meanwhile, Japan's services sector grew at its weakest pace in 3 months in March, according to a private survey.
That's Rebecca Bunden in Mumbai. President Trump praised Pam Bondi as a, quote, great American patriot Thursday, shortly after he removed her as Attorney General. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche will act as interim AG. Bondi's 14-month tenure as head of the Justice Department was marked by controversy, particularly her handling of the release of the Epstein files and her combative appearances at congressional hearings. She was also criticized for going after President Trump's perceived adversaries legally. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has removed Army Chief of Staff General Randy George from his post as the Army's top uniformed officer. The Pentagon has not given a specific reason why George was asked to retire in the midst of the Iran war. George is the latest of more than a dozen firings of top U.S. generals and admirals. This comes as an Iranian military spokesperson said Thursday that Tehran maintains hidden stockpiles of arms, munitions, and production facilities. Israel, meanwhile, has launched a ground invasion in Lebanon against Iran-backed Hezbollah militants. Lebanon's health ministry says Israeli strikes have killed 27 people in a single day. The White House is releasing details of President Trump's proposed 2027 budget. It includes a $1.5 trillion defense spending request. That's the largest of its kind in decades. Trump had indicated even before the war against Iran that he wanted to increase defense spending to modernize the military. He's also calling for a 10% cut in non-defense discretionary spending. The president's annual budget does not carry the force of law. Instead, it reflects an administration's priorities and provides a roadmap to Congress, which handles spending issues. but Congress is free to reject it and often does. U.S. employers added a surprisingly strong 178,000 new jobs last month, rebounding from a dismal February, and the unemployment rate dipped to 4.3%. The Labor Department reported today that hiring marked a rebound from the loss of 133,000 jobs in February. The job gains were about 3 times what economists had forecast. The unemployment rate was down from 4.4% in February. NASA's Artemis II astronauts have fired their boosters and are headed for their loop around the far side of the moon. It marks the first time humans have left Earth's orbit since the 1970s. More from John Beaver.
Over the coming days, they'll go further into space than anyone else in history. Talking via video link, Commander Reed Wiseman gave his thoughts to Mission Control.
It was pretty tense moments there for a second, and when we got done that burn, we just kind of looked at each other as a crew. We have been to the moon before in 1969, 1968 through 1972. It's been a long time since we've been back. And I got to tell you, there is nothing normal about this. Sending 4 humans 250,000 miles away is a Herculean effort, and we are now just realizing the gravity of that.
From Feature Story News in the UK, I'm John Beaver.
President Trump's White House Ballroom Edition plan has won approval from the National Capital Planning Commission. The approval comes after a judge had halted construction. Donna Warder has more.
The commission, which approves or denies construction on federal property in the Washington region, is going ahead with the vote because a commission spokesperson says Tuesday's order by U.S. District Judge Richard Leon to halt construction does not affect the planning process. The commission will also consider some changes to the 90,000 square foot ballroom addition. The ballroom is now estimated to cost $400 million. Donna Warder, Washington.
Welcome back. We are back. This is A Rude Awakening. I'm Sabrina Jacobs. The Nuestra America Convoy was an international humanitarian movement proposed as a maritime convoy planned to deliver aid to Cuba in response to a severe humanitarian and economic crisis during the earlier part of this year. The initiative was initially planned to be a flotilla before being expanded into a global coordinated mission involving the deliveries of humanitarian supplies by air, land, and sea, and converged in Havana on the 21st of March, 2026. The convoy delivered approximately 20 tons of aid. Organizers behind the coalition named the convoy the Nuestra America Convoy after an essay by the Cuban writer and philosopher Jose Marti. And the focus of the conversation this morning is the agroecological aspect of how the people of Cuba, like our brothers and sisters in the global south, are using agroecology to sustain themselves during this time of extreme hardship, as well as how they have been dealing with climate change writ large. And here to talk about their experience are 3 people who were a part of the delegation. We have Brenda Lopez. She is a Chicana organizer who helped found the Los Angeles U.S. Hands Off Cuba Committee. Ms. Lopez is also a member of the Bay Area Network for Solidarity with Cuba and Global Health Partners. We also have Mark Friedman, who is a member of the International Association of Machinists and founder of the Los Angeles Hands Off Cuba Committee. And we also have Olivia Danucci, and she is an anti-militarist based in Washington, D.C. She is with Code Pink and D.C. Local to Global Solidarity Network. She prioritizes working across climate justice and anti-war spaces to further address the challenges U.S. imperialism causes and utilizes artivism to help build the world we want instead. Welcome to the show, all of you. Thank you. All right. So, Olivia Danucci, we're going to go ahead and start with you. You're coming from that Code Pink perspective. That's a very powerful organization, national organization. And from our conversations off mic, you went to Cuba on the flotilla as a form of direct action with its primary goal as being to deliver as much aid as needed, as well as reinforce the need for escalated solidarity efforts with the people of Cuba. Talk to us about this amazing experience, amazing trip, that you took to Cuba.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I think such a big part of why so many of us went was what we do when we come back and amplify the situation that's going on the ground. And for me, and everyone that went, we didn't see Cuba as a charity case. They have been leading the way in terms of, climate mitigation against the climate response. And also just being under the thumb, under the strangulation of the US government and its blockade, the economic warfare that are sanctions. And so this Trump administration's executive order were an escalation on a 65 plus year economic blockade on the people of the island. But when cutting off fuel, that is just reinforcing how not only like fossil fuel dependent we are in a capitalist world. And despite all of the measures that Cuba has done to respond and like begin that just transition, the just transition isn't here yet. And people in the global South, people of the global majority, and people who are poor, Black, brown folks are get the bear the brunt of these U.S. policies, of these imperialist policies that happen with them. So my role being part of this convoy, being part of this flotilla was in response to as the United States government escalates their cruel policies, international solidarity have to escalate as well. I was so honored to be part of the flotilla because folks on there were from 11 different countries. Folks who were part of the Gaza flotilla that were bringing aid to Gaza. Unfortunately, those missions did not get there. The Israeli government, backed by the US, intercepted them, arrested them, treated them terribly in the conditions with other Palestinian political prisoners. And there were other people on the boat who were part of the shutdowns in Italy. So we used a flotilla as a tactic, as a form of direct action in response to bringing aid into the island. We brought solar panels, we brought medical supplies, food. I think 14 tons were on our boats. But it was also a direct message to the Trump administration, who has been bombing boats in the Caribbean, that, they are going to use they are trying to scare us. They are trying to use fear tactics to dismiss people and to make people comply and advance because of fear. But instead, we did not let that deter us. And we were the flotilla was a part of that convoy, like you said, of over 600 different people who answered this call to be with the people of Cuba. And it was an important time to do that.
Yeah, most definitely, especially when there's this huge need. So talk to us about the agroecological aspects of how Cuba is surviving. Things are even more tight than they've ever been at this point for the reasons that you've already stated. But talk to us about what type of tactics or what type of survival tactics that they're employing to survive.
Yeah, well, as many folks know, but not enough people know, especially in the climate space, that the Pentagon is the #1 institutional polluter. And we see when bombs go off and seeing like land totally explode, like that might make sense to people, but it's also like the testing of weapons and nuclear testing that have toxins that go into water and land. And it also, when things like in Hawaii with the naval ships leaked and poisoned the water of hundreds of thousands of households. And then as the climate crisis escalates, the hurricanes get more intense, like we see in parts of Cuba. But the blockade particularly has prevented seed exchange needed for resilient biodiversity in the face of flooding. It's prevented implementation of Cuba's robust climate plan, which includes the energy transition, adaptation, and natural solutions, which is why it was so important for us to bring in solar panels, right? So the people of Cuba have created the foundations for the solar panels to be received and to be implemented But because they can't receive them through the blockade, we need their creativity and bring those in. This convoy was going into Havana, but like parts of the East are hit more disproportionately through the blockade, especially like right now, like getting the materials out to people in the more rural areas is more difficult, despite them having these really robust plans. So despite the suffocating blockade that limits the ability to adequately meet many of the needs, they show us that we can create a society that resists them. So they also do really well at bringing multiple sectors together, and which, recognizes that environmental policy can't be separated from political, social, and housing policy. Everything from the way that they have like a hyper local way of decision making, bringing community into these things, the fact that their doctors and nurses at their health in the hospitals are meeting the needs of their people, because healthcare and environmental racism are one and the same, right? You think about the effects of a climate disaster have effects on health. And we saw this as well. The blockade made it extremely difficult for Cuba to recover after Hurricane Ian, partially due to the blockade necessitating that many resources were devoted to addressing the COVID pandemic, which was difficult due to the blockade. The people in Cuba created 5 vaccines, but they couldn't administer them because of the syringes. The syringes couldn't come in through the blockade. Despite all of this, you still see, like even in recent weeks, when farmers couldn't transport their goods, their goods being their food to make people be able to eat, they just held markets right where they were. And that didn't mean that people had to walk further to get there, that they had to go further to get their water to be able to water the plants and do those things. But because they are a people that I don't want to romanticize resilience, but because they are used to having to deal with these things and respond, they do have these like mechanisms in place. And there's a really good documentary, and it's slipping from my mind. Maybe one of the other panelists have this that makes this information like really accessible. But I think part of it too is that when these climate disasters hit, or when an executive order hits, just the fact that the community coming togetherness is already just like within the fabric of their society, it makes it be a response versus a reaction, which so many communities in the US, because we're so individualistic, we are reacting, and people are isolated, people are dying at more rampant rates because we don't have the structures in place to take care of our elders, people who have special needs, people who are not able to be connected if the power goes out and ways like that.
Most definitely. I think that video you're talking about is our agroecology, our future. Yeah, our agroecology, our future, award-winning Cuba video documentary, taking into account what the farmers, scientists, and activists are doing to build food sovereignty. But yeah, thank you for that, Olivia. I really appreciate that. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I think a big thing about this convoy was that everyone went, and despite the circumstances, were the amount of people that were talking directly to so many people I know, they were there. They're like, I just talked to every Cuban I knew. I wanted to like hear their story and be able to do something when we come back. And so much of that is bringing people back to Cuba, having more groups go as delegations, have more people go directly to the countryside, directly to the more rural areas, particularly around the climate justice lens. So if people are interested to either go to Cuba or help raise money to get direct like these material aid in, or do more political education, that is a reverberating effect after the convoy, and a lot of people wanting to go and connect with farmers, especially in parts of the East, Santiago and other places, is where like the Afro-Cubans are there, and they're again utilizing their connection to the land and the music, the healing, all of these ways in which that they're building a different world despite what's going on. So encourage folks to plug in with folks who have already been to Cuba, or go yourself, or organize more fundraisers to be in support of the people of Cuba.
All right, that was the voice of Olivia DeNucci, and she is an anti-militarist based in Washington, D.C., along with being a part of Code Pink. She's also part of the D.C. Local to Global Solidarity Network. Olivia DeNucci, thank you so much. All right, so we're going to move on.
Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to hear from the other folks as well.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit, and we're going to hear from Brenda Lopez. And again, Brenda Lopez is a Chicana organizer who helped found the Los Angeles U.S. Hands-Off Cuba Committee. And Ms. Lopez is also a member of the Bay Area Network for Solidarity with Cuba and Global Health Partners. So Olivia was just talking about the health issues that arise during natural disasters. Brenda, go ahead and talk to us about your experience in this convoy. Go ahead.
Hi, Sabrina. Well, thanks for having us. Mark and I were part of the flight that departed from Miami to Havana on March 20th, carrying more than 100 activists and organizers representing over 50 solidarity organizations, political groups, and labor and trade union collectives from 17 countries. And with us, we brought approximately 5 tons with a value of about $500,000 of medical supplies and other essential items. As Olivia was mentioning, the scarcity of not just medical supplies, but just basic necessities in general has been happening now for over 65 years due to over 243 sanctions and heightening of Trump putting Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list. And now with this petroleum blockade, it only chokeholds even more the movements of these supplies that are brought in, from international solidarity groups like Olivia was mentioning, like during COVID, when Cuba couldn't buy syringes because they were patented, and it was literally up to solidarity groups all over the world to come together and provide those for Cuba. And so that continues. And some of the stuff that was brought with us on the plane were medications, respiratory supplies, surgical kits, NICU supplies, infection control equipment, mobility aids, intravenous supplies, and just basic patient care items, because all of these things are patented, which means like any item that is more than 10% US patented, like Cuba does not have the ability to buy. And so this was our way of showing our commitment to dignity, to health, and just solidarity with the Cuban people, and being able to get through these very difficult times that are totally inedible and very much caused, by US policies.
And let's go a little further. Let's drill down a little bit more. And Mark Friedman, feel free to chime in. Talk to us more about what you're seeing as far as food and how they're dealing with using agroecological practices to make more food. How are they working with the land? Did you have any experience with that?
Well, I can add just a little bit of not like how they were growing the food, but how they were distributing the food with them, because it's something that I was just asking regular folks that I was talking to, like, what do you guys do when, there's no power or no gas to cook the food? And a little bit of what Olivia was talking about, just like, just the collectiveness in the community that the Cuban people have. They're like, oh yeah, like recently we've just been setting up a big fire in the middle of the street and cooking a big pot of food. And it's sort of like, everybody brings in ingredients that they have, and they're able to collectively make food and feed each other this way, which I guess goes back to that point of like response versus reaction. They've been living under these conditions for a very long time, and they already have these structures and strategies to take care of their basic needs without having to rely on others. I don't know if you want to add more, Mark.
I think that when we talk about any of the developments in Cuba today, we need to put it in the context of the 65-year-old blockade. the resiliency of the Cuban people in the face of the worst blockade in the history of humanity. And then with the oil blockade imposed by Trump in the early part of this year, meant that there was no oil getting into Cuba for 3 months. And due to that and the world outcry and activities like the convoy and other actions worldwide, the pressure was on the Trump administration. And Cuba has always been willing to negotiate. They have always been willing to have investment, whether it be of Cuban Americans or anyone else. And that investment takes place. There are big hotels that are joint projects of Italy or Indonesia or Spain that exist in Cuba. But the priority is also that there be unions there and there be guaranteed certain working conditions and wages. I want to go back to a little bit the climate change and that's impact on Cuba and their resistance to that through what they called Tarea Vida, life's task. And that was a campaign launched about a dozen years ago with multiple year goals, like 5-year goal, 50-year goal, etc., to make Cuba more resilient to climate change and to deal with issues on the ground there that are resulting. For example, the rise of sea level. Cuba is expected as an island to experience one of the largest sea level rises. So what has Cuba done? They have moved everybody who wants to move inland from the beach, however many yards, past the sand dunes, whatever, built them a brand new house and gave it to them. In order to deal with the sea level rise, they've also launched a campaign to plant mangroves all around the island. Mangroves are trees that grow on the edges of saltwater, freshwater combo and serve to stop storm surges. The other thing they've done is begun to move crops up the mountain where it's cooler weather. They're also undergoing a massive campaign to replenish coral reefs, more than any other country in the world. And as a marine biologist, when we went there on various delegations sponsored by the National Aquarium or international environmental conferences, we saw that exactly, the development of climate change resistant corals. We have to remember that corals grow very slowly, a quarter of an inch a year. So developing those that can be impervious to the warming temperatures is very important, although it's a very slow process, but Cuba is doing it. Through this Tarea Vida, they are making a transition from a humid tropical climate towards a subhumid climate. The patterns of rain have changed. The availability of water has changed with droughts. Temperatures have become different, will continue to become different. And as leaders of this, advisors on science have said, we will have to feed ourselves differently, build differently, dress differently. It is very complex. In post-revolutionary Cuba, there were laws that were promoted public and collective values from the start, such as environmental laws. In 1959, the agrarian reform gave the state responsibility for protecting natural areas, initiated reforestation programs, excluded forest reserves from distribution to agricultural collectives, and gave land to any campesino who wanted it. So they have been active since the days of the guerrilla war in the mountains, in the Sierra Maestra, dealing with environmental issues. So I have full confidence that the Cuban people will resolve some of these issues. They are the victims of global climate change, but they began in one of Fidel's early speeches in 1995 to the first, what's called COP, the Climate International Conference. He warned of the dangers, saying, we are behind the 8 ball. It is too late already. On a world scale, we must deal with climate change. But no one took his heed. Of course, the U.S. rejected being part of the COP conferences and any decisions that came out of that. But other countries in the world are trying to do the best that they can dealing with climate change as well.
Mm-hmm. That is very, very, very true. And what do you do? What can you do? It seems that Cuba's ahead, still ahead of all of us. Talk to us more about the your experience as a marine biologist and making these trips, because this isn't your first trip. This isn't your fifth trip to Cuba, Mark Friedman. But yeah, talk to us a little bit more about your experience as a marine biologist.
As a marine biology teacher in an inner city school in LA that had the only inner city program for marine science. This was a complete science course with lots of field trips, a marine biology club, which Brenda was a leader of, that took students out to Catalina, up to Monterey Bay, down to San Diego, to experience the marine environment and get them more educated and involved in environmental issues. Our first experience was actually in 2019, taking a group of students that included Brenda when she was a high school student to an environmental conference in Cuba sponsored by the aquarium there. And since then, every year we have participated in their international marine science conferences with different groups of young people, students making presentations, especially on ocean plastic pollution and efforts that students have been involved in LA and other cities to reduce that plastic pollution that goes into the ocean that is totally destroying ocean environments. The ecological ecosystems are compromised. Organisms are dying. They're eating the plastic. The plastic then is ingested by them. It is broken down by acids in those animals' stomachs, like fish or crabs or whatever, and then incorporated into the flesh and tissue of those animals. Then we eat the fish, and then we imbibe those microplastics in our own body. And I hate to tell you, Sabrina, but in your body, there is plastic, and probably in most of the organs in our bodies. And who knows if this is now maybe somewhat responsible for more Alzheimer's or dementia. When you have nanoparticles of plastic in your blood, in your brain, in your spleen, in all of your organs. So these conferences were on an annual basis, and Brenda can talk more about them and the impact on her. But we developed a relationship with the aquarium and other organizations there, the University of Havana Center for the Study of Marine Sciences, and other students of marine science, to collaborate, to share what we were doing. We jointly published a book on ocean plastic pollution that was geared towards, in Spanish, young people, Spanish-speaking communities in the United States, and it's being distributed throughout the United States. It is online at various institutions, including the LA Maritime Institute, where I do volunteer work now. And the Cubans use it to help educate young people in Cuba. And they have a massive program to educate on ocean plastic pollution. To gather the plastic, they are now melting it down and using it to make construction materials or benches, in a way that some aspects of that is being done in the United States. But they are primarily the victims of ocean plastic pollution and all the plastic that washes up on their shores, especially from Central America. But they are trying through Tarea Vida and through the aquarium to deal with the issue of ocean plastic pollution. I'll stop there.
Okay. All right. So, Brenda, I'm going to throw it back to you. Brenda Lopez, what was the most impactful for you? I mean, this isn't your first.
I think.
No, sorry. Go ahead. This isn't your first trip to Cuba, and very much involved in the marine biological part.
The creativity, the ingenuity they foresee against all these difficulties, because in all of their approaches, whether it be health, whether it be education, whether it be the environment, they have a very holistic and preventative approach to things. And I think that preventative approach is something that we can all learn from so much. I feel like here in the US, we have a very reactionary approach to things. We let things happen and then we take care of them. And we've seen over and over again that when we react these ways to things, we end up losing more money it ends up taking longer to mitigate the cost and the atrocities that happen, especially as environmental catastrophes, increasingly will continue to happen due to climate change. And to highlight a point from Tarea Vida, which is what Mark was talking about, within it, there's an exercise called Ejercicio Meteoro, which mandates all adults by law to go through a civilian defense training program that teaches them how to help during an evacuation. And it's a 2-day training session, teaching people on risk reduction for hurricanes. And this is regardless of age. They have simulation exercises for evacuations. They have concrete preparation actions and facilities that mobilize the community at the local level. And local authorities also know who needs special care and knows how to assist the most vulnerable. So schools and hospitals are converted to shelters, transportations are organized, and every Cuban is designated a location for a safety and refuge in advance. And alerts are 72 hours before hurricanes hit. And this has shown to be, to not only save lives, but in the case of Cuba, save material things. So this even means like if they know a person's homes and furniture could be destroyed during a hurricane or a catastrophic event, they will move the furniture because they know it's not easy to, resupply those things. And we can look at the data too, like during Hurricane Matthew in the US in 2016, it killed 44 people in the US and 0 in Cuba. And when we look at Hurricane Isabel, more Americans were killed in 2003 than 6 major hurricanes killed Cubans from 1996 to 2002. And because of this, the UN has repeatedly cited Cuba as a global model for risk reduction and climate change preparedness and just disaster preparation in general. And yeah, as I mentioned, like I just think there's so much we can learn from Cuba, not just in their environmental approach, but their health approach and their education approach. And because of that, like after that visit for the environmental conference with Mark in 2019, we started the US Hands Off Cuba Committee in LA. Because as you mentioned, I'm a Chicana, I'm not Cuban American. A lot of people ask like, why is this important to you? And like, this is why it's important to me. I just feel like as Americans, we have so much to learn of these approaches that Cuba has taken. And especially now in highlight of our current administration, people are looking for alternatives, the way we approach things. And I think Cuba is a perfect example of alternatives that we can learn from and grow from.
I want to come back. I found the quote by Fidel Castro at the Rio Earth Summit. This was the first one, 1992. So what's that, 40 years ago? He said, humankind is at risk of disappearing due to the rapid and progressive elimination of its natural habitat. We are becoming aware of this problem when it is almost too late to prevent it. This was an alarming speech. He blamed the exploitative and unequal international relations resulting from colonialism and imperialism by the US, by Europe, for the rapacious environmental destruction fueled by capitalist consumer societies, threatening the extinction of mankind. I mean, talk about the foresight. He was also a strong supporter of the Cuban National Aquarium, as well as the transition to science in Cuba with the development of a massive biopharma, which Brenda referred to, and you referred to also in terms of the COVID vaccines. Cuba recognized that they had minimal natural resources. They have some nickel, a little bit of oil, they've got some fisheries, but their strength was the people of Cuba. And so this massive effort to develop biopharma, as well as to train for free over 33,000 doctors at the Latin American School of Medicine for free. Over 300 US citizens have gone there rather than paying $250,000 for a medical degree here through years and years. It is a 6-year program in Cuba. It is free. People are given stipends. and then they come back and they take their medical boards and they can be practicing doctors. And this is happening to doctors who come in from all around the world. There are currently 500 Palestinian youth studying to be doctors in Cuba for free. I believe that the political climate in the United States has been changing rapidly, as we have seen with the protests around the killings of George Floyd, the massive protest in Minneapolis and other cities against the ICE raids, and beating back the Trump administration, no matter what type of, glamour he tries or lies that he tries to say, beating back the ICE attacks through the training of 30,000 people in Minneapolis, St. Paul to protect immigrants. So these changes are taking place. Young people in the United States are freaked out about climate change and the type of life they will have in 10 or 20 years. And just this past weekend, we saw 8 million people out there demonstrating against no kings. Many different political levels, but a lot of signs around the environment, around defending abortion rights, no war in Iran, defending immigrant workers, etc. And for me, as a union member, this is very heartening because ultimately it is the unions and labor that has the power, okay, to deal with these issues more decisively. Last year, we submitted a resolution to the California AFL-CIO, which represents 2.3 million workers, and it passed a resolution against the blockade to remove Cuba from the Washington's list of suspected terrorist nations, which is a lot of crap. Cuba's not terrorist at all. It's the United States that is the terrorist nation in the world. And so the opportunities exist in every city in the country, whether it be in the Bay Area, the reach of KPFA, KPFK, and all the affiliates, to go to the labor movement now, to get them involved in Cuba solidarity. We have done this here in LA, and our committee operates out of the Union Hall of the Machinists Union, and they have been totally supportive financially, politically, of solidarity with Cuba. And I believe, given what's happening in the United States now, the crisis of capitalism, what people are seeing through with the Trump administration, the violation of free speech, the Constitution, there is no balance of power among what they say the three highest bodies, Supreme Court, Congress, Senate, doesn't exist. Bourgeois law is gone. It does not exist anymore. The king does what he wants. The Democrats have put up no response whatsoever, so it's up to us.
Indeed, indeed. Mark, can you give us, or Brenda, can you give us the website for Los Angeles Hands Off Cuba Committee?
Yeah, folks can find us at ushandsoffcubacommittee.com or US Hands Off Cuba on Instagram as well. And people can also find GH Partners on Instagram. Global Health Partners, as I mentioned, was the organization that donated all the medical supplies that went on the plane with us. And we are still in a year-long process and campaign of supplying surgical sutures to Cuba. And we are also gearing up for a huge neonatal campaign that will be where we will be fundraising millions of dollars to just provide lots of equipment and medical supplies to Cuba.
All right. All right. Thank you for that. I'll have you repeat it again at the end of our conversation. I appreciate that. And of course, the links will be, all pertinent links will be on the show description page for A Rude Awakening at kpfa.org. So Mark, there is this beauty in what you are doing and what your organizations are pushing for. And you're talking about the union. All unions nationally need to get involved, internationally, of course, right? What do you think is what is the catalyst to push that part of this movement forward? And what do you think is the obstacle or the obstacles that are the problem?
That's a very good question. The consciousness of U.S. workers is far below that of workers in most other countries and Europe. And it is a process of raising that. Now, political activists can't do that. It is the crisis of capitalism that causes workers to begin to rethink the type of society they live in and the potential. And as Brenda said, to go to Cuba, to see for yourself that another world is possible, that we don't have to live in a dog-eat-dog world, a sexist world, an anti-gay world, anti-LGBTQ, that it is possible, as Che and Fidel launched in the beginning of the revolution with speeches to young people, a new type of human being, one that is built and based on humanity, based on international solidarity. As Fidel said, we give for the world not what is left, but what we have. And in that sense, Cuba has been the best example of internationalism with their medical delegations throughout the world, their delegations to prevent military veterans to prevent the South African invasion of Angola when Angola declared its independence from Portugal and South Africa invaded. Cuba sent over 350,000 troops over 10 years, volunteers, not mercenaries like the US sends, volunteers that defended Angola. 2,000 Cubans died and left their blood in the soils of Angola to defend that country's sovereignty. But what is happening among workers in the US now is seeing the rise of prices. Look at what's happening with gasoline. Why? Speculation. Right. Oil from the Middle East does not come to the US. It is a lie, and it has always been a lie. However, it is the speculation and the scare that allows the oil companies to raise their prices. Most of the oil from that area of the world goes to Europe, not to the United States. So working people are beginning to see what happens when the US carries out a war, whether it be against Iran, whether they go in and take an elected president of a country in Venezuela, when Trump declares Cuba's next, I will do whatever I want to that country. Marco Rubio will be the president of Cuba next year. That's a lie. The people of Cuba will defend their sovereignty. They will defend their socialist society. This is not a cakewalk if the US ever considers to invade Cuba, because Cuba's been preparing, and they are prepared. But with the changes in the labor movement now, it is possible for political activists, for supporters of Palestine against Israeli genocide, for activists in the Black Liberation Movement, Chicano movement, all different struggles, to go to the unions, because things are changing. We can win unions over, and unions have the power that students don't have. Unions have far more power than the average working person. In California, if the ILWU wanted to stop shipments of arms to Israel, they could do it tomorrow, period. They aren't at that political consciousness. They were around apartheid, led by the local in Oakland. The ILWU refused to unload ships or load ships for South Africa during apartheid. We need that consciousness on other struggles now. And I believe that political activists need to spend their time working with the unions in order to raise political consciousness and get them involved. Our delegation to May Day, which leaves in a couple of weeks, of 50 people, has more than 6 different unions participating: the Teamsters, the Amazon Labor Union, the Machinists, the Service Employees International Union, the Association of Flight Attendants, and others, as well as political activists. This shows the potential of winning solidarity among unions for Cuba.
Right. Mark Friedman, I got one more question to you, and then I'm going to have you close it out, Brenda Lopez. But Mark, as far as we need this push for the unions to do what they need to do and get a move on. But in the context of climate change, climate justice, climate resilience, what stood out to you the most or what has stood out to you the most? Being a marine biologist, numerous trips to Cuba. Talk to me about, just real quickly, because we want to have Brenda close it out. What has stood out to you the most to date?
It is the willingness of Cuba to act on climate change, to protect the people of Cuba, and to share that information and knowledge. There has been some sharing with marine scientists in Florida and Cuba around the regeneration of coral reefs and choosing those species of corals that are more adaptable to increase in water temperatures. Many people don't realize this. You know what the water temperature was off the coast of Miami last summer? 100 degrees.
Whoa.
Marine organisms cannot survive. Corals cannot pull up and leave. Some fish can emigrate, and we see that here in California, an emigration of fish from Mexico to San Diego to LA. Sea turtles, never before seen in Southern California, are now off our shores because the water is warmer. So Cuba is willing to share. And that, like all the other aspects of their science, their technology, is what stands out the most. And the world, the overwhelming number of countries who voted at the United Nations every single year for 30 years to end the blockade. And then, of course, that's non-binding resolution, and the US would veto it, or Israel would veto it anyway if they could. But the international support for Cuba that is unparalleled because of the type of society they are and what they're willing to share to the world. And right now, Rubio is on a campaign to force countries that have Cuban doctors to drive them out of those countries: Honduras, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Dominica, leaving these countries with far fewer doctors, and if any doctors, in remote areas where the Cubans have been. It's a way that Rubio is using to put the squeeze on Cuba, prevent some economic aid that Cuba gets from contracts with those countries for Cuban doctors. So it is the resilience of the Cuban people that gives me full confidence, and full confidence that American workers are waking up.
Indeed, indeed. All right. Well, Brenda Lopez, go ahead and close us out. What are your hopes for the future, as far as Cuba is concerned, their approach to climate change, what your organization is doing? You can go right ahead.
Yeah, my hopes are that the US removes all 243 sanctions and the current petroleum blockade, and having them removed off the state sponsors terrorism list, and just, yeah, let them have their autonomy, let them be sovereign. As we already mentioned, just some of the so many accomplishments that Cuba has been able to reach despite having these economic crippling situations for now over like almost 70 years. And so, yeah, so that's my hope, that they can reach their own sovereignty and autonomy, and that we can learn from them and have normal relationships. And yeah, if people want to keep on the loop on what the U.S. Council of Cuba Committee is doing, you guys can give us a follow on Instagram at U.S. Hands Off Cuba. We'll be posting about our upcoming delegation during May Day, and that way folks can see if they're interested for next year. Because as we said, the best way to see and understand what's going on in Cuba is to go yourself and experience it and ask questions. And if folks are interested in donating to current or upcoming medical campaigns, they can go to GH Partners also on Instagram, or also ghpartners.org on the website.
All right. That's Global Health Partners, ghp.org. Well, I want to thank you. This has been a very, very insightful conversation. If there's another, there is going to be another convoy going out. Folks can get more information at where the LA US Convoy website, or
Nuestra America Convoy also has their own Instagram.
okay, so Nuestra America Convoy, Nuestra America Convoy. So if you're interested in going, dear listener, you can too. You can join. You can go, and bring some love, bring help, bring supplies. It's not impossible. Yes, there is a blockade, but it's possible.
And it's legal.
And it is legal. So folks who have been scared about that, having reservations about it, oh, I'm not going to be able to go. No, it is legal. You can do it. All right. So Brenda Lopez and Mark Friedman, I want to thank you so much. And of course, Olivia DeNucci, but she had to leave the conversation. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to impart us with all this information. Thank you so much for being on A Rude Awakening. Truly appreciate you.
Thank you,
for
Sabrina.
allowing us to uplift Cuba.
Indeed. Alrighty, folks, before I let you go, I have to mention the documentary that Mark Friedman mentioned to me, Mark and Brenda mentioned to me off mic, and that was the documentary by Helen Yaffee entitled Cuba's Life Task, Combating Climate Change. Ms. Yaffee is also a published author, and her latest book is entitled We Are Cuba. And I have to also say my biggest takeaway from this conversation with Olivia, Brenda, Mark is their passionate love for Cuba. And I tell you, it is contagious, absolutely contagious. And that does it for another edition of A Rude Awakening. I'm Sabrina Jacobs. A big thank you to my guests, Olivia DeNucci, Brenda Lopez, and Mark Friedman for taking the time. The lovely Kirsten is on the controls, and thank you for facilitating. I'll be back next week, same time, same place. Stay tuned for a rebroadcast of Democracy Now! Coming up next. And remember, good people, embrace each other as we embrace the mother of us all. Thank you for listening.
Just sent me a raccoon opening a fridge and grabbing something.
Did you watch the whole thing, though?
Yeah, that's not the point.
Come on, man. It opened it like it had leftovers in there.
Why am I getting 5 of these a day?
Is it that obvious I'm trying not to think about the timeline we're living in?
A little.
Honestly, Rod, the news just feels weird, man.
Fair.
I just don't know what's real anymore.
That's why we end up on KPFA.
Yeah, I don't know what I'd do without KPFA.
Sanity, huh? A place to actually understand what's going on.
Not just the same panic loop.
Exactly.
All right, I got one more video.
Yeah, I know you do.
KPFA. Stay informed without losing your mind.
Journalist and former White House press secretary, Bill Moyers.
This is the oldest story in America. The struggle to determine whether we, the people, is a spiritual idea embedded in a political reality, one nation, indivisible, or merely a charade masquerading as piety and manipulated by the powerful and privileged to sustain their own way of life at the expense of others.
Storytelling for social change, only on KPFA.
And if you don't know, now you know.
94.1 KPFA and 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, and online everywhere at kpfa.org.